The Summarize node within n8n essentially allows you to take a look at incoming items like a data analyst would do. And I would know that because I spent 2 years as a data analyst before pivoting into data science, and I still use a lot of these summary statistics today when I take a look and analyze data sets. We're going to be essentially taking a look at aggregates such as like an average or a min or a max or the sum of incoming items. In addition to this, right, there's an option also to group by. So instead of taking a look at, let's say, for example, we're taking the average of all of the customers, we can take the average per customer name as well. And I'll explain that here in this video. We have a ton to cover. This is a really amazing node that I see a lot of people kind of glance over, and there's a lot of capabilities with it. So we're going to jump into that shortly. Also, if you guys need any help with data needs or any n8n or AI automations, I am taking on freelance customers. You can find my contact information down below in the description. All right, with this out of the way, let's jump into the Summarize node. All right, guys, I only have a few notes really quick before we jump into the node and some of the different things associated with it. But what I wanted to say is this summarizes across items. So I know there's a few different ways that we could output this, but you can see like in this example over here, I have 7 items going into Summarize. Okay. Where this is helpful at, there's internal data tables, right? You want to see what's going on that side of things. You have like some sort of spreadsheet, Google Sheets, Excel, CSV files. You want to build out some type of conditional logic based off of the result of Summarize, right? Let's see if the results here, if else, a switch, you can even filter. It really just depends on like where you want to take this, because you can have one item coming out or you could have multiple items coming out. And again, this is kind of a node that would be used sort of like what a data analyst would do, right? Full-time job. I was a data analyst and now I'm a data scientist. There's a lot of overlap on there. And I'm constantly being asked to summarize data, right? So you can think of things like, well, I'll show you down below, like counts, min, max, sum, average. Like I'm getting asked these questions often when looking at data sets. So this is a node that you could do this here within n8n without knowing how to code, right? Real life, you'd want to use SQL. You could do all this you could also do this in Python. Typically, I do this in Python pandas, but natively in n8n, you could use something called the Summarize node. So first, right, what we're going to do is look for Summarize. So what we're going to just do is type in Summarize over here to the right. And you can say it says sum, count, max, etc. across items, right? Pretty basic on that side of things. Also, what I'll be using for this data set is a code node. So I'll be running custom JavaScript or Python on that side of things. Well, I'm going to be using specifically JSON in the code node and then dropping it into Summarize. You'll also be using edit fields here in this video, split out. We'll cover that here in a second. But let's start off with the most basic example, which is count, right? So there's 2 different counts on this side of things, and we're going to kind of put these in parallel. Also, to execute all these, I'm just going to use a manual trigger. So let's just throw this up over here. I find that easiest for the tutorials when we're walking through. Okay, so what we're doing first is we start this off with the manual trigger. And then what I'm putting over here is some basic JSON, right? So we have an ID for each item, right? We have a category and then the item itself, right? So you can see ID 1, category fruit, apple, right? ID 2, fruit, banana, right? Fruit, apple, vegetable, fruit, grain, right? Rice, and all these have unique IDs across the board, right? We have 7 different items over here. Well, the carrots are the same, so technically not, right? We have 6 different ones over here, but only a few different versions of these categories, okay? So when we go into Summarize, here's how it works, right? So first thing you'll see at the top is it says fields to summarize, and you have an aggregation over here. Now I'm going to cover every single one of these aggregations for you guys, as well as the fields to split by throughout this video. So stay tuned for that. We're going to start off with count, right? And what we're going to do is we're just going to count the number of categories, right? So if I execute this step, there's 7 different categories over here. Not 7 different, but 7 total, right? You can see we have IDs 1 through 7, right? And all these categories are filled out. So you have 7 across over here. That is why we have the count being 7, right? And what you'll notice also is our final item that we have over here, right? As it says one item, we have the aggregation. So that starts over here, count. We have an underscore, and then we have the field name. So count category. So that is how that is going to be generated, right? And I think it's kind of nice, right? Because you don't have to rename it. It's just automatically there on that side of things, okay? Now, let's talk about count unique, right? So what I have over here is, you can see same exact stuff, right? We have fruits, we have vegetables, right? We have apple here. I believe this is actually a little bit different. We have 2 apples, we have 2 carrots, right? We have 2 bananas on that side of things, right? So slightly different data set. And this time what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at count unique, right? And if we go over here, right, we can do category again. So you can see we have fruit, right? That's 1 unique category. We have vegetable, that's 2 unique categories, and we have grain. So we should get the result of 3 on a count unique, right? And you can see count unique is 3, right? But if we just go over here and do counts, right, it does 7. Again, the difference between count and count unique is count unique looks at different versions, right? How many different versions of fruit is there, right? Whereas count just looks at the total over here, right? So the count of the IDs, the count of the category, the count of the item, right? All those are going to be 7, right? If I do count unique of the ID, right, that is going to be 7 because we have 7 different IDs over there, right? You can see it's 7, but we go back over here, we do like item, right? And you saw some items are repeated, right? We get 4, right? There's 7 total items over here. So if we want to count that, we just do count. But if we want what's unique, right? What is different across the board, right? That's what we have over here. And you can see count unique. We have 4 on that side of things. So that's the difference, right? Count, total present, right? And then this one is the total different ones present in items. Hopefully that makes sense, because I do see people getting confused on this side of things, at least on like the data analytics side. People just don't know the difference between a count and a count unique. This is often kind of like a basic interview question for like a data analyst role, like a level 1. But that is something that's asked. Now, obviously they're coding this out in SQL, but you'd use a distinct in SQL. But regardless, that would be that over here. And by the way, let me know if you guys kind of like where I try to talk about how this relates to like data analytics or like software engineering. Obviously, I'm not a software engineer by any sorts, and this video isn't really focused on software engineering, but I'm gonna try to add in principles on this side of things because I think it's important. Okay. So next, what we're gonna do, and also I should mention, and I briefly talked about this, right? Count and count unique. You know, while we use strings here for like the categories and the items, right? This can be also applicable to numbers, as I showed you with these IDs, right? There's 7 on the counts and there's 7 on the count unique because all these numbers are different. But you can also utilize that on that side of things, right? And you can think of it like in this item or this example, maybe we had like prices, right? And some of these are going to be the same price. You know, that's when you're going to have differences in count unique versus count. Okay. We'll cover that, I think, a little bit later here, but let's jump into our next one. And also when we jump into group bys here at the very end too, you'll see the difference. But again, a little bit later on, a little bit more complicated. So next, what we're going to do is we're going to cover some of these other summary statistics. So often you'll ask like, what's the smallest item, right? Which is going to be your min, and then your max, right? Which is going to be your largest. So like, we'll just put over here smallest, right? And then your max, which is going to be your largest, right? So again, what we're going to do over here is we're actually going to create an array. So I have just different numbers I populated into this array, 20, 15, 11, 8, and 7. And then we're just going to split this out. So they're each different items over here, which is a benefit of the split out node and why this is going to be after the split out here in the series. But which, by the way, if this is your first video you're watching, I'm trying to build out the best like n8n playlist here on YouTube. So we have like over 30 videos right now, but you know, I plan at least doing 3+ videos every single week. But why we use split out, right? Turn the list inside items into separate items, right? So, you know, this array is technically one item. We go to the split out and then we populate each, you know, element of the array into a specific item, right? So what you can see is like in our array, we have the numbers 20, 15, 11, 8, and 7, right? The minimum over here is going to be 7, whereas the maximum is going to be 20 because that's the largest, right? It doesn't matter the order of these items, right? We're going to get the same result. So you go over here, right? You go to the aggregate, you go to min, right? You have all of these over here, right? 2, 3, 4, 5 different numbers. So drag and drop numbers into the field. And you can see the min of the numbers is 7. Again, takes the aggregation, takes this underscore, and we get that result, one item on the outside, right? If we do the largest, it's going to be the opposite, right? So then we go over here, go to summarize, same exact thing, and you'll see 20, right? Because that is going to be the largest one. So pretty cool on that side of things. And just jumping over here, right? We have sum. Just execute this workflow. And you can see the result is 61, right? We go to aggregation, we choose some numbers, right? And you can just test the math if you want, right? 20 plus 15, 35, 46, 54, and then 61. You can see we have 61 over there. Cool. Average. So average on this side of things, right? We take all the numbers over here. So again, we take the sum and then divide by the number that we have over here. So we take 61 and we divide it by 5, right? Take the sum and divide by count. Okay, so that's essentially how we do the average, right? And, you know, I didn't actually put this in over here, so we'll just go through the split out on this side of things, and then I'll just drag number over here for average. And you can see we get 12.12, right? And just do the math. 12 times 5 is 60. 5 times 0.2 is 1. Add them together, 61. So pretty basic. Now, what I will say, and before we jump into a little bit more complicated versions of Summarize, it is quite a bummer that there isn't the median in here, right? And the reason why you want to use median is it's not always the best to use average as a data point. And I don't want to be too nuanced when it comes to numbers and things like that, because I can be, because I run data for a living. But let's say, for example, you have a data set, right? And that has these numbers, right? You have 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we have 100 over here, right? So, the difference on these, right? And when we do average and median, and I didn't initially plan to put this over here, right? The median on this is going to be 3, right? That's the middle, right? Because how you take the median, you cross out these, you cross out these, that's the median, right? So that's pretty easy. But the average, right? We have 3 plus 3, which is 6 plus 4, 10. So we have 110, right? And divide by 5, you're going to get 22. All right. So, there's a big difference between the average and the median. And when you're analyzing data sets, right, you just have to have that intuition of when you want to use the average, when you want to use the median. And, it's just a bummer that we don't have that real option to go in here and summarize by the median. Again, you can see that is not over here. Now, is this something that n8n should add? I think they should, right? So maybe one day n8n adds in the median, but that's not today. So if you want to find the median, you're going to have to use the code node, right? Again, a little bit outside the scope, and maybe I'll put this in the code node. Have to use code node, because it's kind of also in my sorting video where we talked about rankings, right? It's just not present right now in n8n, and I think it's something that's missing. So I don't know if anyone from n8n actually watches these videos or not, but please put in the median in the summarize on that side of things. Also to note, when you're looking at data sets, right? And again, I don't want to derail this video too much. This 100 is an outlier. There's tests, and I have videos on the channel that talk about outliers and different things like that, but this is an outlier. So often what you'll want to do is remove outliers when you're looking at your data set. And there's a lot of different ways that you could do that, right? Let's say you have some math over here, right? You could do an if node, and then if the number isn't an outlier, then we put this into summarize, or you could just filter, right? So again, a little outside the scope, but I'll just put this over here, right? So outliers, if node or filter, right? And I don't know where this video is going to go, before or after the if node. I promise you, I have the if node on the channel already. I haven't uploaded the filter video yet. I need to record it, but regardless, like if you have outlier, like use the if node or the filter node on that side of things. Probably you're better off using filter, in my personal opinion, on that side of things. Like probably don't use if. I would use a filter node and just remove any outliers, but maybe you want to keep the outliers and put them somewhere. So that's why maybe you want to use the if node. But regardless, outside the scope, maybe we'll talk about like advanced data when it comes to n8n. I wouldn't even really call this advanced, but just in general, I just want to give you guys that heads up just because that's my background. Okay. So I'm just going to remove these over here, or it doesn't matter. We'll keep them over there. And we're going to jump into our next one, which is going to be summarizing multiple fields. Now, what's really nice when you jump into programming and things like that, like over here, we've been just going summarize and we're doing one field at a time. Like, okay, what's the average, right? Like, what's the sum? But, you can do multiple things at a time, right? And this probably shouldn't say summarize multiple fields, but I should say multiple summaries, right? So what we're going to do on this side of things is we're going to find the count, we're going to find the average, as well as the max of the numbers. So I'm just going to execute this, and you can see we get all three now, right? All these are populated in one item, which is kind of cool. But now we have a little bit more data on it. Like we have 5 different numbers. The average of these numbers is 12.12, and the maximum of these numbers are 20. So all you have to do is click down below, add field, and then add what you want. Like, let's say I want to find the minimum now, just throw minimum in over here, and you can see that this is expanded outwards. So kind of cool that we get a lot of different data points at one spot, right? We don't have to do one summarize for each data point that we want, right? We can just do this over here. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at fields to split by, all right? And I believe this is going to be a little bit different. So what we have over here, right, is we have numbers for a different person, right? So like, let's say we had person A, they had 5 orders on a day, right? Person A had 2 orders on another day, right? Person B had 11 orders in a day. Person B had 2 orders on another day. And then person C had 1 order on a day, right? And we want to find these statistics for each person, right? Like, what's the maximum amount of orders that someone had? What's the average number of orders? So everything that we've covered so far is just on like the larger scope, like the entire data set. But now we need to break this down for each person, right? And so this is where fields to split by is, right? And what you can see is, again, we'll do an aggregate over here, right? Or not aggregate, sorry. We'll do split out over here. Right? So each of these are going to be an item, right? And then we go to summarize. Let's find the count. Let's find the average. Let's grab the max as well. So we're iterating based off of what we covered last time, right? And now we choose fields to split by because we want to see the statistics for each person. So just drag and drop, not person, but the name over here, right? And you'll see we have 3 items now, right? So person A, we have the count of orders, right? Well, person A had 2 orders. That's correct. We had the average orders, right? Okay, well, we take 5 plus 2. That's 7 divided by 2, 3.5. The max of the orders is 5. And then we see the name over here, which is populated last, person A, right? Do the same thing for B, right? B had 2 orders, right? Then we take 13 divided by 2, 6.5. The max is 11. And then person C, well, they only had 1 order, right? So everything's gonna be the same, right? Count is going to be 1. The average, since it's only 1 order, it's gonna be that order number, which is 1. The max and the min are both gonna be 1. Obviously, we aren't doing the min here. And the name is person C, right? And when you jump into data, right, I know they call this field to split by, but like outside of n8n, this is commonly referred to as a group by, right? You use group bys all the time when working with real world data, right? Super, super popular. So that is going to be group by, right? Again, like taking a look at this, we had all these different people, we had 3 people, and we want to find the statistics for each person, right? So we drop the fields of split by over here. We're like, how do we want to look at this? We want to look at the person level, and we want to find these different statistics, right? And again, you could do one aggregation if you want, or you can do multiple. I just showed you multiple because we just covered that over here for multiple summaries. All right, so now let's take a look at output format, right? So with this summarize over here, and let me go back on this side of things, right? And just drag this over here. When we split this out by the names, right? We have 3 items coming out, right? Whereas like everything else, we've had just 1 item, right? Now we have 3 because we have 3 different names over here. This generated 3 items. But what happens if you don't want 3 items? Like, hey, I just want 1 item in general. Like, I don't want to have multiple items coming out. What you want to do is go over here and you choose an option. And let me just show you where that is. You go over here, add options, and you do output format, right? So each split in a separate item is by default. You can see that's what we had above. And then if we go to all splits in a single item, we execute that. And now you can see all these are in 1 item. So just depending on how you want to output this, right? I kind of like this each split in a separate item by default better, but there might be use cases for all splits in a single item. And I just wanted to show you guys that really quick. All right, so a few other minor things to cover really fast that are populated in the Summarize node. So first is concatenate, right? So this chooses how you want to separate items in general. So we're going to go back and use our simple array that we have over here. And we're going to split this out, right, into 5 items, right, numbers across the board. And now what we're going to do is take a look at some of these different options. Now, what I could have done is, made different examples for all these separators, but I'm just going to walk you through these really fast. So first is comma. And what you'll notice also is this is now a string, right? We have 20, 15, 11, 8, 7. All these are populated in a string. We have concatenate numbers over here, and we have it looking like this. And again, like it doesn't necessarily, all these items don't necessarily have to be numbers. I just did that for this example, right? You could have, different strings and they're going to be concatenated like this, right? Next, you have comma and a space. So now you can see these are spaced out and different things like that. And where I find this kind of helpful at is like if you want specific formatting, like, okay, we have an array or whatever else the case may be. We have a bunch of items and we just want to format this and have it as a string in a specific format, right? Like you could do that. You could also put all these in new lines. So you can see it says /n, and that is going to be a way to format items in a new line, right? So often when I'm like programming in Python, I'll just put /n in a print statement and it'll just format this in another line, right? So that's what the /n means. And I might cover some of this type of stuff here in the future on the channel, but we do none over here. These are all like literally concatenated together. There's like no spacing. We've just generated this blob over here. There may be some use cases on it. Then we have space, which is just literally spacing these out, right? And then you have other. So other, you can set whatever separator you want. So like, let's say I want to put a star over here, right? We have a star. Let's say I want to put exclamation point over here, right? You have that. And again, I think it's kind of fun, right? So like, let's put all this over here. Like, it doesn't really matter. Like you could change this up, and yeah, so there is that side of things as well. All right. So lastly, what I want to cover is append. And honestly, like append is very similar to aggregate. So what I have is both of these over here. So we're going to use the same array in both of these, right? We're going to split it out. Again, same exact thing across the board. And what you'll notice is when I go over here, I have appended numbers, right? So append numbers, right? And we have all this over here as an array. And then we go to aggregate, the same exact thing, right? So like personally, I would probably prefer to go with aggregate over Summaries in this instance, but I just wanted to show you that because that is one of the options over here, right? Aggregation, and you can see append. The last thing I wanted to cover really quick is you do have this option over here to include empty values or not. So based off of your use case, you can turn this on or off. But guys, that is Summarize. And I hope this is kind of the most thorough video here on YouTube with the n8n based over on Summarize. But you can think of this as, some of the different data points a data analyst might look at, right? So you can count versus count unique. Remember, unique has to be different for it to technically count, where count just looks for something to be present. All right, we covered min, max, sum, average. You want to use these with numbers, right? It doesn't make sense to find the sum of strings or the average of strings, right? So numbers on that side of things, right? Again, n8n is lacking a median, so you're going to have to use a code node for that. if you really want to start diving into the nuances of data. If you have outliers in your data points, right, that is going to affect your average. So if you either like use a filter or an if on that side of things, right? You can also find multiple summaries. Like you're not forced to do one at a time. You can split across fields, as I showed you each person. This is commonly referred to as a group by in data, right? There's different output formats based off of this group by. If you want to have one item or multiple items, concatenate is pretty cool because it shows you how you want to separate items, commas, spaces, whatever formatting you want. And append is like aggregate. I like just use aggregate in my personal opinion. But that is Summarize. Hopefully you guys found value in this video. If you did, make sure to subscribe to the channel. You want to learn more about n8n? Well, I have a full playlist here on YouTube. Well over 30 videos. My goal is to make this eventually one day over 100 videos, just teaching you guys everything about the software. So if you have anything you want me to cover here in the future, just let me know. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you guys in another video.